Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey ahead. On this episode, we focus on the developments regarding US President Donald Trump and the peace plan for Ukraine. The entire world is wondering on what terms the war in Ukraine is going to end, as an American negotiated peace deal looms large on the horizon. US President Donald Trump spoke over the phone with Vladimir Putin, following it up with a conversation with Vladimir Zelenskyy. Both Trump and Putin are likely to meet in person to discuss the issue further. But what impact will it have on Ukraine itself and on its struggle for survival? Let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The diplomatic gears surrounding Ukraine are being put in motion. The US Treasury Secretary's visit to Kyiv means that both sides are serious about the recently discussed rare earths deal. The agreement would see the US gain access to Ukraine's minerals worth hundreds of billions of dollars in exchange for further aid.
We believe that America's strength, together with us and all our partners, is enough to pressure Russia and Putin into peace.
The work on the negotiations has already begun. Trump has held a call with Vladimir Putin and has spoken with Ukraine's Zelenskyy. The US president says that peace negotiations are to begin immediately.
We ultimately expect to meet. In fact, we expect that he'll come here and I'll go there, and we're going to meet also probably in Saudi Arabia the first time.
Needless to say, a lot is at stake for both sides. Russia, as the aggressor, cannot afford to lose face after fighting for 3 years in a war of its own making. Ukraine, meanwhile, wants to get back as much territory as it can from Russian hands. It also wants justice for the thousands of people that have been killed, and it wants real security guarantees, which will ensure that Moscow never lays a hand on it again. Some of Kyiv's partners, however, are already urging restraint when it comes to what can be achieved in these peace talks.
But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering.
Added to this entire mix is Trump's freeze on foreign aid. Observers are warning that without sufficient funds, many independent media will be left without enough money to continue operating. This in turn could lead to a rise in disinformation at a critical moment. The stage is being set. Trump and Putin have traded invitations. But the question on the lips of many is where Ukraine's seat at this table will be.
And now, as always, it's time to explore the issue in greater detail. So, let's begin. Peace talks in Ukraine, an idea that both hope and skepticism cling to. President Trump has taken the initiative, speaking with both President Zelenskyy and with Vladimir Putin, pushing for immediate negotiations. A meeting is set for Friday in Munich, led by Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. But what does peace really mean in this context, and at what cost? US officials, including Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, have already stated that Ukraine will not regain its 2014 borders, nor will NATO membership be an option. This leaves Kyiv in a precarious position, pressured to compromise while ensuring that any truce does not become just a pause before Russia strikes again. Ukraine has clear red lines. It will not recognize occupied territories as Russian, nor will it accept military restrictions or abandon NATO aspirations altogether. Some proposals, like delaying NATO membership or freezing the front line, might be negotiable. Even an exchange of occupied land has been floated, Ukraine's foothold in Kursk region for part of Russian-occupied Ukraine. But would Putin truly accept such a deal, or would he simply bide his time? Security remains Ukraine's primary concern. Zelenskyy insists that any guarantees must include US backing, rejecting the idea of European-only assurances. Meanwhile, Trump's peace plan might include European peacekeepers, but deploying them to a volatile front is fraught with risks. And then there are Russia's demands, lifting sanctions, legitimizing pro-Russian political projects, recognizing the Russian-backed Orthodox Church. Ukraine resists, knowing that every concession risks eroding its very sovereignty. Ultimately, this is more than a diplomatic chess game. It is a fight for Ukraine's survival. And unless ironclad guarantees deter future aggression, any ceasefire may only be the prelude to the next war. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Yehor Brailian, analyst at Detector Media. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Yes, hello.
So, with the Munich Security Conference looming large on the horizon and Donald Trump finally revealing some details concerning what the plan for Ukraine is going to look like, people are talking about a different kind of Munich, the bad one, the 1938 one. Do you think that this comparison is justified at this stage?
Yes, this comparison is absolutely relevant because Russian dictator Putin likes historical data, historical dates, symbolism, and we can remember his Munich speech back in 2007, where he openly declared his war against the West, and that phone call with President Trump was on the 10th anniversary of Minsk II agreement, which was signed between Ukraine, Russia, France, and Germany. And that's why we need to be ready for different scenarios. However, I know that actually Trump is not capable of pushing Ukraine to sign any deal, because there are no strategies about Ukraine in Washington. So they work, with presidents, and they don't have any strategic view on Russian-Ukrainian war.
So let's talk about the details. Some commentators are saying, okay, what Trump says is not something that we welcome with enthusiasm. However, under Joe Biden, the strategy was actually similar, except they didn't talk about it. They also didn't have a plan, and they didn't want to allow Ukraine to win the war outright. NATO membership also apparently was not on the cards back then. So now they are saying so openly, no NATO membership, which of course is again a bad decision, but at least they are admitting it and making it a part of their official strategy right now. So would you say that this is really more of the same in a way, that Ukraine has to be able to fight back, even if the United States proves to be not the most reliable of allies, one that has its own interests and that has to balance them against what it can do for Ukraine?
Yes, you are right by saying that Trump said it publicly about NATO. Is that topic in which Biden and his administration were too diplomatic. Right now, we have our main task is to strengthen the armed forces of Ukraine, is to cooperate more with our European partners, and push Trump for more cooperation. And to explain to Trump administration that yes, China is a problem, China is a national security threat for NATO, but Russia has to be priority for Washington, and containment of Russia must be priority for Washington, despite of Russia-China cooperation, that they have common and anti-Western policy.
So what do you think about the negotiation strategy? Some people said that Mike Sexteth, the Secretary of Defense, actually didn't read Trump's book Art of the Deal, because he actually said a couple of things that America is not going to do, essentially giving this all away, like NATO membership, 1991/2014 borders for Ukraine. He just gave them away. Is this the way that you should negotiate?
We must negotiate any peace agreements with Russia, first of all, with our partners. So we need to negotiate further and next security guarantees and security commitments from our partners. We in Ukraine understand that the main security guarantee for Ukraine could be only NATO membership, and in that regard, we we need to have some sort of security guarantees from our European partners. There are a lot of talks about peacekeeping mission in Ukraine, and we can't forget about the occupied territory. So first of all, we need to have the common view on negotiations inside Ukraine. Secondly, Ukraine and our partners to be on the same page. And only after that, we can talk with Russia. But we have to take in mind that Russia doesn't want any negotiation. Russia needs negotiations only for armament and only to get some new geopolitical and military strength. That's all.
So in this context, again, coming back to the speech by Pete Hegseth, whom I mistakenly referred to Mike Hegseth, my bad. But anyway, what he said was that we don't want Minsk III. This is not what we want. And yet some people say, look, well, this is what you're doing, effectively, because this is not going to be a peace deal or a ceasefire that will have robust enough guarantees to hold it all together. Related question, we're talking about European security guarantees. Can Europe even accomplish this task right now, given the capacity of its military?
Yes, we have already got good level of cooperation with our partners, and we are very active from Ukrainian side in participating in small alliances such as Lublin Triangle. We see GEF countries are more active in cooperating more with Ukraine. E5 format, Weimar Triangle. So small alliances is a decision for Ukraine in uniting our partners in Europe. And Poland is among those countries which are advocating for more. So if we would have a really united European front, then we can talk with Trump very openly and say to him, look, we are ready, and the US must be ready as well, because transatlantic bond is something what we can't fail, because NATO is about defending democracy and defending the Western world in broader sense. And I'm not sure that the US will leave NATO, but the US will be more committed to Indo-Pacific security rather than European security, unfortunately.
Don't you think the problem is exactly that NATO is supposed to be about defending certain values, but Trump doesn't really think along these lines? Trump has already accepted the bid for the natural resources of Ukraine, and some say, look, Ukraine would be giving a lot to the US, and the US is not really contributing that much in exchange. I mean, it has contributed a lot in the past, but it is not, for example, sending any troops to ensure that the ceasefire holds, right? Do you think the risk with this transactional approach is that the US will want a quick ceasefire in order for this to look good for the public, a ceasefire that will last for a couple of years and then will start falling apart? And at which stage Trump's tenure will be coming to an end, so he'll be able to say, okay, so this is not my business anymore. I did my best, it didn't work. Do you think that this is a short-sighted approach?
Yes, it's a very short-sighted approach. Something what we have already seen in Gaza, when Republicans were involved in this peace talks in January, and Trump wants to have a very quick solution. But you can't have a very quick solution with Russian-Ukrainian war, unfortunately. And yes, even Russia will give some signs to be ready. But Russia wants to talk, Putin wants to talk only with Americans. And that fact that Putin had already talked with Trump several times, it's really something worrying. And short-sighted negotiations or army treaty, it won't solve Russian-Ukrainian war.
And why do you think the United States is not willing to take advantage of the fact that Russia is not at its strongest right now? Its military is floundering. It has lost a lot of its capacity when fighting in Ukraine. And they would be very much open to economic pressure. Those were the initial signals, actually. The US signaled that it may want to drive prices down on the global oil markets. And so Russia effectively would no longer have the money to finance its war machine. Why not use that advantage? Why speak to Putin in a way that compliments him instead, that talks about the achievements of Russian troops in World War II and stuff like that? Again, is this a good way to begin negotiations if you actually have a trump card, pun intended, at the ready in the form of oil prices?
There are three dimensions of this Russia issue in the context of American policymakers. First of all, it's a Sovietology heritage when people from American academia and think tanks, they were obsessed with Russian language, Russian culture. That's why they are not critic towards Russian foreign security policy. Second issue is that for the USA, Democratic Party, Republican Party, China is the main national security threat. And the third point that there are not so many people in Trump administration who have long expertise and vast expertise in Ukrainian affairs. So people just not understand the level of Russian threat. And we are very concerned in Ukraine with the appointment of Tulsi Gabbard as a head of national intelligence of the USA due to her links with Russian oligarch. And intelligence is something what the US partners were giving us to Ukraine, and we have seen already this, almost total Russian reflexive control among some part of American politicians, and that's why they don't see any alternative. They don't have any alternative views on Russia. That's why they still consider Russia as equal great power, like the US and Russia are equal great powers.
So again, hopefully this will change, but there is not that much time to actually make that change happen in the mentality of the elites in the United States. Yehor Brailian was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And now we move on to Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has met with the Ukrainian president. During the meeting, Bessent handed Zelenskyy a draft version of the potential agreement on minerals between the U.S. and Ukraine.
President Zelenskyy says that his team will work on the document immediately so that both sides can quickly agree to concrete terms and sign the deal. US President Donald Trump previously suggested that further aid shipments for Ukraine could depend on various trade deals being reached between Washington and Kyiv. One idea that he floated concerned providing Ukraine with weapons and other kinds of aid in exchange for rare earths and other goods. Zelenskyy, meanwhile, has said that he is open to a deal that would give American companies access to Ukraine's vast mineral reserves in exchange for continued support. The value of these minerals, experts estimate, could amount to as much as $500 billion. Scott Bessent is the first representative of the new Trump administration to visit Ukraine since the new president took office.
The US Senate has voted to confirm Tulsi Gabbard as the new Director of National Intelligence. Gabbard has previously faced criticism for blaming NATO for Russia's invasion of Ukraine and several other controversial views on foreign policy.
I, Tulsi Gabbard, do solemnly swear.
As Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard will be responsible for duties such as operations of America's spy agencies. Some observers have pointed to Gabbard repeating Kremlin rhetoric in the past about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. On X, she wrote in 2022, quote, "This war and suffering could have been easily avoided if Biden admin/NATO had simply acknowledged Russia's legitimate security concerns." She has since seemingly backtracked on this and has said that Vladimir Putin was the one who started the war. Gabbard is both a US National Guard veteran and a former Congress member for the Democratic Party. She left the party in 2022 and later began campaigning alongside Donald Trump.
Currently still playing in...
The United States is set to release Russian cybercrime boss Alexander Vinnik in exchange for the return of American teacher Mark Fogel. Fogel had been serving a 14-year sentence in Russia on charges of allegedly possessing marijuana.
Vinnik was initially detained in Greece in 2017 at the request of the United States. Washington accused him of laundering at least $4 billion in proceeds from various ransomware attacks, identity theft, and drug rings. He must now still forfeit over $100 million to the US government and is awaiting a transfer back to Russia. He is part of the exchange for the freedom of Mark Fogel, who has already returned to the US safely. US President Trump has hailed the prisoner swap and called it a step closer to brokering a peace deal concerning the war in Ukraine. 3 other people were also released from prison in Belarus, according to the Trump administration. They include one American citizen whose name remains undisclosed, Radio Free Europe journalist Andrei Kuznechik, and Alina Mashuk.
Switzerland has approved a new support program for Ukraine's reconstruction for the period between 2025 and 2028. The country's total commitment will reach $5.5 billion by 2036.
The latest program entails Switzerland providing $1.7 billion focused on economic recovery and rebuilding public services in Ukraine. The funds will be allocated from the country's international cooperation budget. In addition to covering economic revival and public services development, the latest program also handles civilian protection and peace support. This area includes demining operations, humanitarian aid, documenting war crimes, and missing person searches. Much of this aid will be focused on Ukraine's frontline regions, which have been affected the most by the war. Despite its official neutrality, Switzerland has already provided substantial economic and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. This help has totaled $3 billion. Swiss aid, according to the country's government, is also meant to provide Ukraine's people with a solid foundation for the future.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.